doing. We're engaged in the game on that, and you're going to hear some really good information about that. We're doing our team that you're going to get to meet. Um, we're in a leadership role in the state of Arizona on this issue. So we're really excited to share some of that with you. And we're going to talk about traditional um, fire insurance for property owners and also for business owners. In that context, it's more of the traditional, what is the community's insurance services offices rating? You may have heard about ISO that directly influences the cost of insurance to ratepayers in a community. So we'll tell you a little bit more about that. I wanted to kind of get to Rick. I think we're going to address one of the problems, one of the issues or concerns you had mentioned at a previous meeting, which was this: how do we create alignment with that wildland fire risk and our ability to develop the community? And so we're working in that area. We've got good things. We'll touch on a high level on some of those, but we're definitely working on that. And if we can, I'm going to go to the next slide. Do we have control? You have control. Excellent. This is something you've seen. It's the 5 E's. And we're really, we're doing some great work in the 5 E's. And today you're going to hear some direct correlation back to that model. And that model is really important to protect the community. Our view of this is we have to advance all of these issues in the 5 E's. We're going to hear a lot about community risk reduction, but part of the 5 E's is the ability of the community to provide an emergency response. And you've heard that from us already. We feel that is one of the areas that we have not been investing in as much as some of the other areas that we have been had the opportunity to invest in. There's a lot of reasons for that, but really want to just kind of point this out to our team. We're going to hear a lot of all of the areas, and it ties directly back to the 5 E's. So any questions on that, we'll cover that at the end. Let's try the next slide. I think that's where our team kind of takes over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Powell, Wildland Fire Captain with Flagstaff Fire Department. Thank you guys for being here. Dylan, our operations captain with our wildland team, we're going to tag team a couple of these slides together, so we will be going back and forth ever so slightly. But we're going to talk about who we are, what we do, and what's changed that we're going to talk about at the end and get into some of these insurance challenges as well.
I just pulled it down so I can pull up your other presentations.
We totally had 2 really cool videos we wanted to show. Okay. So who we are, it's a little unique to have a wildland fire division underneath a fire department at a municipal level. Usually we think of, the state or the federal agencies doing wildland fire. And, but it's been in the Flagstaff Fire Department since 1997. So very forward thinking starting back then. There's only a handful of municipal fire departments in the state of Arizona that have a program like ours. Some of them may have 1 or 2 people as well, where we actually have 9 full-time personnel working proactively and collaboratively to deliver mitigation and response services to Flagstaff and the greater Flagstaff region. Our risk isn't just drawn on a map with a line. We have to work with partners in many different ways. So we do provide the initial fire attack for wildland fires on city-owned and managed lands. So our open space, public works, parks locations, private lands within the city. And we also work closely in coordination with our neighboring fire districts, state and federal agencies. We travel around the country quite a bit on wildland fires, and I'll be honest, it's really impressive the coordination we see here in Flagstaff. How smoothly we can transition between a call comes in from a Forest Service lookout tower, goes to their dispatch, turns out it's in the city, goes to our dispatch, and everybody's rolling to that fire. There are very few places that are able to coordinate as effectively behind the scenes the way we do here. So our wildland fire management program responds, but we do a lot of preparation as well. We'll talk about both of these as we walk through these 5 E's. So our presentation will provide a couple slides of who we are, but we're going to go through each individual of the 5 E's. Then we'll also talk a little bit about the difference between program funding and project funding, what our program does and we're able to provide versus what are project funds that we would need to do new things. Okay, next slide, please. So you've probably seen this previously in the fire department presentation, but we fall under the deputy chief of community risk reduction. So we're organized as a battalion. So we've got a battalion chief, 2 captains, 4 engineers, and 2 firefighters. We work across both the natural environment and the built environment. So you're going to hear us say things like engineering in the natural environment. And that probably is a lot more familiar if we say the term thinning in the forest or, rearranging the structure and pattern of trees. But to stay consistent with the E's, you'll hear us say terms like engineering in the natural environment. That basically means we're thinning or burning. We're trying to, rearrange the fuel structure in the forest. And again, while initial attack fires in the community is a primary purpose of ours, we also work greatly to reduce our risk. And we'd like to remind folks that risk is a probability of a hazard occurring. And what we'll talk mostly about today is that hazard, which is a wildfire, either in the forest, in the neighborhood. It doesn't matter if it's trees or a structure, that's fire that's happening. It's fuel that's combusting. So we'll go back and forth quite a bit on that. And really what we're always trying to do is mitigate that risk to be more in our favor. So reduce the likelihood of that risk occurring and having it, when it does occur, have as little impact as possible. Okay, next slide, please. So our vision, we fall under the fire department. We have the exact same mission, provide that high level of service. But we tie our vision to something called the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy. And that has 3 pillars, which are basically safe and effective wildfire response, resilient landscapes, fire adapted communities. So everything we're doing on a daily basis is falling into one of those 3 pillars. And then the 5 E's fit into those as well. So our vision, really think about, we want to allow both the natural environment and the built environment. If there is a fire, how do we mitigate that likelihood that fire will cause economic, social, or environmental impacts that are undesirable? And then safe and effective wildfire response, how do we make sure that as we're responding to that incident, we're doing it, again, it sounds simple, the most safe and effective way possible. But really thinking strategically, that might not mean, now in the city, we put all these fires out, but when we work with our federal partners that have a larger landscape, that might not mean the best thing we can do that day, the most effective thing we can do that day is put that fire out right there. It might mean we back off a little bit and do a management decision-making process that results in getting some beneficial fire on the ground. So we really need to be prepared within our division to respond to all of these 3 pillars at any moment in time. We can't ignore any one of these, or that 3-legged stool is going to fall down. Okay, next slide. So getting into a few more details about who we are, there's our initiatives on the left. Some of those are probably pretty familiar. We may have a few on there that are new. Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, $10 million bond passed in 2012. National innovation. No other community was doing that sort of thing at the time. Carbon neutrality plan, obviously keeping the carbon in the trees and not in the clouds and smoke is really important. A couple of the ones on there that are relatively new. The Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission was a thing we'll get into in another slide that leads a lot of our strategies. I was appointed to that commission in 2022. The Forest Restoration Initiative has been around for almost a decade, but we're really gathering some more steam lately. Gordon Betty Moore Foundation's Wildfire Resilience Initiative is something we've been plugged in with for about 1.5 years. And that's giving us some access to some tools we'll talk about here as well. Again, there's our 5 E's. So enforcing science-based codes and ordinances, engineering, again, there's that engineering or, modifying and designing both natural and built environments, continuously improving our emergency response, educating citizens. We also educate internal to the fire department to make sure we're working as a leader internally. And then supporting economic incentives. That's a big driver of change. A lot of the research is showing how important a little economic incentive can be for people to make change to their wildfire risk. So we organize both locally, nationally, and local, regional, and national level initiatives. These strategies drive much of the work we do on the ground. And we'll use the term a bunch, best available science. We really, we don't need to be the experts. We need to know the experts. We need to be able to get access to the information they have and that they produce. Mitigation work happens year round. This isn't a fire season anymore. We used to talk about, oh, our fire season was driven by, we dry out after winter. It's dry right now. We're responding to fires now. This isn't a seasonal thing anymore. And then just repeating again, when we say engineer, we mean the treatment that we're doing in that specific place. Next slide, please. Real quick, how did we want to handle questions? Do we want to go with questions or save them to the end? What do you guys?
We'll take questions as we go.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So when we say best available science, here are three big important parts of understanding what we mean. So America Burning, in 1973, America Burning was produced. It was a report that was created by a diverse group of a handful of stakeholders, directly led to the Federal Fire Prevention and Control Act of 1974, shifting national focus from fire suppression to what we call prevention. It spurred the creation of the U.S. Fire Administration, National Fire Academy, and improved firefighter safety standards. This collaborative effort led to meaningful change across the fire service. The reason you have smoke detectors is likely going back to America Burning and driving these mitigation strategies. That then ties right into that middle report there. That was our Wildfire Commission report. So recognizing the success of America Burning, Congress established the Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission in the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to review nearly every facet of our wildland fire system. With 50 members, the commission brought together a rare diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and expertise to address the wildfire crisis, reaching full consensus on a sweeping set of recommendations to address the rising risk of wildfire. We developed 167 recommendations. It's only about 300 pages long, so feel free to read it in your spare time. We did actually develop two reports. There was a general main report and a secondary report specifically on aviation resources. The reason I bring this up is it's such a driver of our strategies because this report was really unique. This one was one of the first national reports that connected our wildfire crisis to both the natural and the built environment. So a perfect example for us is the tunnel fire in 2022, burned 30 homes. The forest around the tunnel fire is just fine. I mean, yes, we burned up a few trees here and there, but it's nothing catastrophic. We're going to be able to regrow trees in those areas. 30 homes burned out. So it's not just a tree problem. This also recognizes how our wildfire crisis is also a public health crisis. The smoke impacts from undesirable wildfires, the stress impacts. We're seeing, the insurance impacts, the flooding impacts. All of these things come together. And in that report, I think we comprehensively recognize these challenges in a way that no other documents have been recognizing. And then more recently, in the last year, the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, a few of you have probably heard us talk about this. They have a program called Wildfire Prepared Home and Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood. And IBHS is really leading the way in collaborative built environment wildfire risk reduction science with these two standards. So as we go through our presentation, almost everything we're going to talk about ties back to the science and the studies that have contributed to these three different reports. Next slide, please. So what do? We don't just respond to fires. I know a lot of you think of the fire department, we're in a truck, there's smoke in the air and you hear sirens and lights and we're out there with water and tools. There's a lot more we do than just that. It's no longer a land management problem. Our challenges cannot be solved because the Forest Service goes out and does a thinning project. That's just part of it. The drivers are numerous and complex. Our program is actively working to increase integration between programs, policies, and workforces. We're trying to set up enabling conditions to reduce risk before a fire. We work with a lot of partners during a fire. That's mostly the fire service itself. But then after the fire, we work with so many partners as well. There's fundamental connections here that we can't ignore to really go after these challenges collaboratively. Our wildfire risk is a challenge requiring sustained investment and commitment. No one can do this alone, and traditional risk reduction strategies must rapidly evolve in order to keep pace with these challenges. And then one thing you'll also hear us occasionally use the term beneficial fire. And this came out of the Wildfire Commission report. And I just want to acknowledge that while fire is central to this crisis, obviously it's a wildfire crisis, it's also a critical part of the solution. So when we use the term beneficial fire, what that really means is prescribed burning, cultural burning, and wildland fire managed for resource objectives. These are necessary to restore fire adapted ecosystems and reduce the risk of undesirable wildfires that pose a significant threat to our community. Okay, next slide, please. This one we usually like to have a little sequence of images. It's a, I'm gonna wander up here. Is that okay?
Yes.
Boo? What we want to tell the story here is really important. Here's 1909. This is a fire adapted forest before an era of making sure all the fires were put out and cultural burning was eliminated. Ponderosa pine trees, lots of space between the trees, lots of space between lower branches and the ground. This is a fire adapted system. This is a place where fire stays on the ground. This is the exact same place in 1948. You can see the same tree. We like to joke it's probably not the same guy, but same tree. Very different change in tree density, so there's more trees. And then the up and down connection of the trees, those ladder fuels are getting much more dense. And then 1989 over here. So basically when our wildland fire management program was formed around 1997, this is basically what we had around Flagstaff. This is what we were seeing. And this forest, when it burns, looks like this. This forest looks like this. This fire is not one that we can get in front of. This is not one that a fire truck is going to put out. The fire is that big probably because it's super windy that day, which means our aerial resources are probably sitting at the airport checking the weather. So there's not a whole lot we can do except back way off that fire and think days out in front of it on how we can mitigate the impacts of that fire. This one you can put out with boots and a shovel and a little garden hose. So really when we think about in 1997, when Chief Mike Bradley came to the city of Flagstaff Fire Department, he came from California where they had experienced some catastrophic fires at the time then. 25 lives had been lost in the Buckingham and Norfolk area and wildfires. 3,354 homes had burned. I mean, billions of dollars in damages in 1997 when our fire chief was here. He knew the difference between this and this. And so that's when we started trying to get back to this. And really thinking about in the natural environment, how we get from this to this. It's not necessarily rocket science. We rearrange the fuels to get back to this. How we do it is fairly complicated. This is where we transition away from an environmental challenge to an economic challenge. How do we pay for it? We can't just cut these trees and put them in a parking lot. We have to do something with it. So enabling the industry to utilize this material to get it back into that shape has been a really important part of our success over time. So our goal when we think about engineering, think about our engineering not as like building a bridge, but turning this type of fuel structure back to that type of fuel structure. Next slide, please. Here's another representation of that process. Again, thinking about on that top there, that's a non-engineered environment where our trees are dense. We have all those ladder fuels. If it does catch on fire, we're going to burn it down and we're going to have those severe economic impacts we're all familiar with. The engineered environment. So that's the environment where we have people in a place doing work to rearrange the structure of the forest to one that creates more of a natural condition, less severe economic impacts. We have a choice. We can continue to try to, sneak by in a way every year with a non-engineered environment, or we can invest to make sure we get that structure and pattern back to that engineered slide on the bottom there. So our landscape, the engineered landscape, we have better water yield across our watersheds. We reduce the likelihood of post-fire flooding. These economic impacts are amazing. For every dollar in suppression costs that we see out there, when we do the engineered environment work, we're potentially seeing a $30 savings in long-term costs. So it really is a big driver. We know these things. We've experienced it here in Flagstaff in good and bad ways. A lot of the good ways you're never going to hear about. When there's a fire start on a red flag day and you don't hear about it, it's because we put it out. You didn't need to know about it. And that happens every single year in the engineered environment areas. Okay, next slide, please.
Quick question.
Yes.
The slide previous, you showed that original forest environment was spaced out, and then the current one. I mean, the estimate of the forest immediately surrounding Flagstaff, how much is engineered or thin?
Oh, man.
How much isn't?
Great question. We have all kinds of really impressive numbers we can share on how many acres we've treated. And we're really proud of what we kind of call, I've got on another slide, our donut around Flagstaff. We have our donut that probably anywhere in the West, but we still have some gaps in there we need to work with. And fire loves to find those little pockets. That one little area just west of Timberline and Fedoni Park area that the tunnel fire started in is a great example. We had a giant fire scar from the Schultz fire above it. We had thinning projects all around. it found that one little spot to grab hold and just ran through the neighborhood right there. We can say the Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, we have a chart of over 20,000 acres of thinning that has happened in that footprint. The Forest Restoration Initiative has, I believe, over 400,000 acres of ecological thinning since about 2010 across the larger Ponderosa pine forest. We see even larger numbers when it comes to beneficial fire management, where we're probably over 1 million acres within 4 of beneficial fire. So we've got really big numbers, but there's still a lot of work we need to do. So I don't want those numbers to make you feel like we are complacent in this in any way. We know there's a lot more to do.
You're going to cover the cyclic nature of that later on.
Yes, we've got that in here. Thank you for bringing that up. So, you know what, I'll just mention it right now while we're here. If we go in and we do an ecological thinning, these trees don't pay their way out of the woods. We have to make sure we invest so loggers can go in and do that work. We're moving that needle just far enough now where in some of these projects, trees, the small and medium trees can actually pay a little bit of their way onto that truck to a sawmill. But if you're going to a mill far away, which is most of our mills, it's expensive, that hauling is expensive, and we have to pay upfront for that work to take place. But we're moving that needle in a very positive direction to get back to a restoration plan where those trees can actually come out of the woods without us having to pay for every truckload to leave. But once you do that ecological thinning, you guys know, you'll drive around town and you'll see a carpet of trees this big in places. Those trees are growing back. There's some places where trees aren't growing back. It's not Flagstaff. We have trees that are growing back. If we don't maintain those sites with beneficial fire within 3, 5, maybe 7 years, depending on productivity of those soils, we're going to have a wildfire risk that comes right back. So it's challenging. We're actually seeing in some areas where we've done the thinning and the fire hasn't come back into play, people are going back in there with different techniques, whether it's chainsaws or what we call mastication machines. It's like a big mower to make sure that we maintain those treatments where we engineered the forest. So it's not like we go in and we do a thinning and we just check it off and say, see you later, we're done. We have to go back into these areas. Ongoing maintenance is a big key. Okay, next slide, please. So we've seen this, the wildfire problem, our social, economic, and environmental impacts of a natural high severity forest fire. That slide on the left is the Schultz fire, Father's Day in 2010. And then that house is an area that was flooded after the Schultz fire. The cost of those fires, I mean, we're seeing suppression costs that are probably less than 10% of the overall cost. So a lot of people think the most expensive thing is mobilizing firefighters to go put them out. That's a small cost. It's only about 10% of these big incidents. Schultz fire costs are going to keep on going, and then we had the pipeline fire rip through there again. So it's once these areas are catastrophically damaged, it's really hard to ever get them back in a condition where we don't have to go back year after year after year and mitigate these challenges. So let's see, since 2010, we average some sort of large catastrophic fire across the greater Flagstaff region about every 3 years. Tunnel, pipeline, Schultz. Schultz costs, again, NAU and ERI have put these reports out. It's pretty well documented. Even with the cost recovery of the real estate market on that side of town, we still see these catastrophic numbers. And one of the spooky things with some of these fire challenges is a lot of rural areas rely on fire districts to be funded by a property tax base. When there's a big bad fire and property values take a hit, we literally are defunding fire districts because of a fire risk. It's a vicious cycle that we're in. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to get into the E's. Engineering. That's us right there. That's the city. That's like less than a mile from right here. And so on the left there, you can see the great success we've had with engineering our forest, our natural environment. That's Observatory Mesa Natural Area that was thinned with FWPP funds with a state grant. We maintained that site with burning. We've done prescribed fire right up to that fence line across the road from the neighbors. Great example of efforts like the Greater Flagstaff Forest Partnership, Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, and Forest Restoration Initiative. Again, creating that donut around town. We're really proud of when you zoom out on Google Maps, you see the donut. You don't have to be a forester to know where that donut is. You can just see, is it grass that I can see through the trees, or do I just see trees? Our challenge now, and we want to make this clear in this slide, is what you see on the right half of that slide. So that's the built environment. So that's where the homes are. That's not one landowner that we can go and have a chat with and have one conversation and come up with a plan. So really working in that natural environment has its own suite of challenges, but the built environment has its much more complex footprint that we have to work in. So while implementing agreements with the Coconino National Forest and our state forestry partners are really effective, we're gonna have to go driveway by driveway on that parcel on the right, and convince people to make some pretty significant changes to not just the trees on their property, the shrubs on their property, potentially their house itself, in order to make the built environment as resilient as we see the natural environments. And then just thinking about our partners, how we work in the woods on the left there, we currently have agreements with the Forest Service over $2 million to do really cool projects. So as we think about engineering our environment in the forest, our natural environment, we don't just focus on our city limits boundary. We realize that we have risks that come from outside the city. So how we work with our federal partners, there's times where like in FWPP, we've given them dollars to implement treatments on federal land. And then there's times where they need some capacity and they're able to send funds over to our side of the house. And we can contract out projects on Forest Service land as well. So what is really evident, I just want to make sure is that on the right, parcel by parcel, we're working with those homeowners. A lot of those folks up there may not want to make some of the changes we recommend. They may not be able to afford some of the changes we recommend. So engineering in the built environment is a challenge that we are working to equalize with our success that we've had in the natural environment. We envision a day where that picture up there, we don't see such a drastic change between those two footprints. Okay, next slide.
I have a question.
Yes.
For Fry, is that federal funds, local funds? Where's the money coming for that initiative?
So Fort Fry is funded by the USDA Forest Service. And it's the Coconino, Kaibab, not the North Kaibab. So like the Tucson and Williams, part of the Kaibab, all the Coconino, all the Apache Sickreeves, and the parts of the Tonto that aren't desert. And so where they have trees. So it was a pretty transformational thing at the time when it was formed in 2010. You know, we had already by the Rodeo Chetasky 2002, we had a 500,000 acre wildfire in Arizona. 10,000 acre restoration projects don't prevent 500,000 acre fires. So that was at the time a decision that it's like, hey, if we really want to protect our communities in the forest, we need to protect the whole forest. So it took almost 10 years, but 2.5 million acres of that footprint is now cleared for thinning and burning on federal land. So the funding for that has fluctuated over the years. What hasn't fluctuated is the commitment of the stakeholders. We stayed strong. We absorbed some of the challenges. We've seen grand contracting opportunities that turned into less than productive contracting implementation. So there's been lots of lessons learned, but our local loggers, I mean, we think of people like Ken Ryland, who was here for years, the High Desert Investment, the Perkins family, 3 generations working on one job site. Ben Aragon with Dakota Logging. I mean, our local loggers have been the foundation of the timber programs within Florida Fry, and maintaining a volume of material to them because we have all of that NEPA complete has been an amazing success for us. Contracting and how private sector utilizes that stuff is still challenging, but the idea that we can supply them with whatever they need is one of the things that makes it really unique.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, next slide. One thing, going back to Paul Sommerfeld, within the Wildland Fire Management Division, was one of the original co-chairs of the stakeholder. So Flagstaff Fire Department, through our Wildland Division, has been one of the most consistent role players in that collaborative process within Forefront. Okay, so how do we engineer the natural environment? We'll talk about 2 things over time. You'll hear us talk about thinning and burning. And they're 2 very different processes. So how we do private sector thinning, or how we do thinning, is driven by the private sector. So they're the ones that are going to come in with feather punchers and log trucks. You know, the Forest Service doesn't own a feather puncher in Arizona. They don't own a log truck. They don't own a sawmill. The city doesn't do that stuff either. We hire the experts that do that stuff when we can. And so really think about when we say thinning, there are times where our staff or other folks from the Forest Service can go out there with chainsaws. But when we can manage a contract, we have project funding to enable the private sector to go do that work. That's where we really see a big scaling up of our impact. So really think of when we say thinning in your head, private sector utilization, a contractor coming in and doing that work. And then when we say burning, that's almost always public sector employees. That's your fire departments, your fire districts, your land management agencies. There's very little private sector capacity for burning compared to public sector capacity, especially in Arizona. We're largely driven by fire service agencies, which is great because not only are we responding to the wildfires, we're implementing the prescribed fires. We're deciding when a beneficial wildfire may be appropriate So it's really two completely different systems. They're both tied to at the hip in their ability to protect our communities, but how we manage those processes are very, very different. Okay, next slide. We're gonna hand it over to Dylan.
Nice to meet you all. I'm Dylan Gutko, Wildland Fire Operations Captain. So we're going to talk about what we do to engineer the natural environment. So what you're looking at here is two pictures of the exact same city parcel over by the airport. And so the process of engineering the environment is specifically done through prescribed fire and mechanical cutting. There are key management techniques in that can protect areas of high value, such as homes within the wildland urban interface and restore important ecological processes. And so what you're looking at here is a picture on the left before treatment, non-engineered, and on the right after treatment. And so it has been engineered, and this was done through mechanical hand thinning by the WFM program. And then all the material was piled, then burned. And then now this project is sitting in a place where the next few years we'll be ready to go back in and do a prescribed burn broadcast of the entire area. So this is just for reference what a treatment kind of looks like. And again, hitting on that process of how it's kind of a bit cyclical, where we can't just go in, thin burn piles, and then move right into prescribed fire. We need to let that land recover where those piles were so that we don't disturb the soils any further. So there's just some time gap in the way we're going to move through some of this stuff. I think one of the biggest things for our program is we have a really unique role here, not only with the city, but working in collaboration with our partner agencies, is that we are responsible for organizing those cross-boundary projects and work that go on with the Forest Service in the state. It used to always be, I used to work for the Forest Service for about 15 years prior to coming here. And it always used to be, we stopped where the fence line was. That's your piece of ground. You're going to treat that, and we're going to treat our side of the fence. And we have completely moved away from that. We're sharing resources. We're figuring out ways to make boundaries that make more sense for prescribed fire and finding ways to do the work more effectively. Next slide, please. And again, this is just more of an on the ground view. So this is a unit that, again, or not a unit, but a piece of landscape here in the city that hadn't had any engineering done. So we can go to the next slide. And then same piece of ground, but after we've done the engineering to it that we wanted, and now we have a desired forest condition that's going to be more resilient to wildfire. Then we can go to next. Okay, and this should be a video. If you can hit play on this one. And it's going to be pretty choppy. But essentially what you're seeing here in this video and in the next one, with how choppy it is, it's kind of hard to see, but this is some video footage from one of the prescribed burns that we just did this fall, right over here above Thorpe Park. You guys might have seen that smoke back in November. And essentially what this fire is, or what this video is showing, is that the fire behavior that's happening here is a moderate intensity. And it's what we're looking for when we're doing that prescribed burn. It's enough to remove the fuels that are accumulated on the ground, burn hot enough to get those to consume. Also have enough heat to raise the tree canopy level, so that when we do get a non-planned ignition or an IA in the city, when that fire starts moving through, it's not able to climb up into the canopy and then get in the treetops and really start taking off and running on us. They're giving us more issues with trying to contain that. So we can go to the next slide if the video wants to skip. We can walk past that to that.
This is another video.
And again, just another piece of ground from another prescribed burn, just showing the same thing. And that's where, we had and we'll get to it, but there's a wildfire that you'll see some pictures of that happened 2 or 3 years ago in the same area. And it was in an area that had been treated, I'm going to say probably 10 years prior. And you can see the difference in two of the pictures when we get to that slide. But I think from there, Neil, we'll jump back to Neil on engineering the built environment.
One thing I have for presentation is Dylan is recently qualified as a type 2 prescribed fire burn boss. We have 2 of these burn bosses within the city. That is a very rare thing for a municipal fire department to have that kind of capacity where we can manage our own prescribed burn program. We rarely have the number of boots we need at one time, but we have partners that can help us, whether it's NAU, some other city staff, other state and federal partners. But for our staff to be able to have these kind of qualifications. We'll get into that a little more on how we do the emergency response side of things. But that's something over the years that has been very unique from Paul Sommerfeld, kind of built that capacity in that we need to build and maintain that level of capacity internally. So how do we engineer built environment? You've learned about our natural environment modifications. What do we do in the built environment? It's basically two things: defensible space and home hardening. So think about the defensible space as the vegetation around your house or the materials around your house. Home hardening is the house itself, so your construction materials. We blur the lines a little bit when it's something like a fence. Is that your defensible space or is that home hardening? I'm not worried about it. We'll just tell you what to do with it either way. But in reality, we want you to have as little flammable material as possible, especially within 5 feet of your home. So that's a term called Zone 0. So that's something we're working aggressively on, is to try to reduce the amount of material in that 0 to 5 foot zone that's flammable. And then home hardening, there's been some really cool research over the last decade around this transition from what used to be known as ignition resistant construction to now what we're aiming for is non-combustible. So it doesn't just resist ignition, it doesn't really burn unless there's some extreme event happening. So the best available science in this space is unfortunately proven in real world examples like the LA fires, Maui fires, and to some degree the tunnel fire. We learned some lessons there as well. So our built environment tools that we're using these days, there's something called the WUI app, WUUII. It's basically a software package that when we go do a home assessment now, when we stand in somebody's driveway, we're not just giving them recommendations and filling out a piece of paper. We're actually collecting data. We're giving them a really robust report. So if it says you need to work on your zone 0, it gives them a framework of that. If they don't have the right screening on their vents, they get a link to a website where they can purchase screening. It's this really engaging opportunity now where we're not just giving a homeowner recommendations, we're now building a data collection of things that homeowners need to do that we can track. We can go back to them in 6 months and say, hey, did you ever get to that task we talked about? So now we're really building this data set where we can help understand our community's needs in a really aggressive way. Another tool we have is the WUI codes, the Wildland Urban Interface Code, that is largely based on dictating terms of construction. We've had a WUI code in Flagstaff since 2008. So when you think of the difference between, like Timber Sky versus Coconino Estates, I know everybody wants to live in Coconino Estates, but in reality, your insurance company would rather you live in Timber Sky. And that is a much more fire adapted building model in that sort of environment. It's not that we can't help Coconino Estates or University Heights or some of the relic neighborhoods get there. They just weren't built at a time when we were considering these things in the construction and the design of that community. Community education is a great tool. I mean, every time we're in somebody's driveway doing a home assessment, we're educating the homeowner, and we're trying to create a condition where that homeowner becomes an advocate. So the next time they talk to their neighbors, they're relaying some of those same messages. The state has a fire insurance review task force that our battalion chief, Paul Otroki, has been appointed to. So we're working at a statewide level to try to align some of these challenges. The Western Fire Chiefs Association has pointed to us as well to play a role in a West-wide effort with 7 different states. We can solve a lot of these challenges in Flagstaff. If the rest of our communities around Arizona, around the West, don't do some of these same things, we're not going to be able to move that needle. Insurance isn't dictated by whether Flagstaff has done the right thing. Reinsurance markets at scale, changes need to occur to really move those challenges to a positive place. And then locally, you've probably heard a few of us, we talk about this resource protection overlay. That was kind of a challenge for many years. I'm sure you know all about the resource protection overlay. This was something that was kind of a 20-plus-year-old relic of construction planning, where we required a certain number of trees to be retained. We realized that we're not optimizing tree retention for development in a lot of areas, and now homeowners are stuck having to remove trees that probably could have been removed a lot cheaper and easier before that home's built. And now with community development, we're in lockstep on making some really cool changes in how we don't let development dictate trees or trees dictate development. We're doing these things together in a really optimized way. So we're really evolving rapidly how we do business based on the things that we're seeing and learning out there for the built environment. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. They have this amazing facility. I believe it's in Tennessee, but I haven't been there yet, so I'll report back when we get a fun trip to go there. But they basically have a building where they burn things down. on purpose. And here's an example. They do this all the time with different construction materials, different methods. They have something called an ember generator. We've all seen those horrible photos from the LA fires at night where there's just embers everywhere, blowing through everywhere. They basically create those scenarios in a controlled environment. That home on the left is traditional construction. The home on the right is what we would call non-combustible. And they'll just rain embers down on both sides of that structure for 5 minutes, then turn it off and see what happens. And over again, we see the traditional construction, whether it's the vegetation or the home itself, within 10 minutes of ember exposure, take off, and the other side be just fine. So the return on investment with Zone Zero, defensible space, home hardening is just exceptional. We know this works. We've seen it work, and these lab environments just reinforce that science-based approach. And working parcel by parcel really is a challenge. It's, we can go to the Forest Service and design a 2 million acre project. Think about how many people it's going to take for us to stand in their driveway and work across Flagstaff that way. There's an estimate that in order to become a wildfire prepared neighborhood, you have to have 80% of those homes in that designated neighborhood complying with some level of our wildfire prepared status. So that's a lot of driveways, but we're going to keep going after it. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there going to be some sort of policy discussion in building guidelines to require non-combustible materials to be used for home construction?
So we
Going
are,
forward?
and Chief, if you want to jump in, please feel free. Our MUI code is being updated. We're initiating that process right now.
We are. We would like to see IBHS standards introduced into the MUI code update that we're preparing for. We'll bring that when we bring the building code, electrical code, and all the suite of codes. The other piece to that is that I think important for that MUI piece is just we understand the sensibility of affordable housing in our community. And we are engaged with some consultants that are telling us if we switch to this, well, what's the impact to cost of homes? And we're pursuing that information now. We know we have to go into the community and do outreach, share that information. And it's a tough spot for us. Affordable housing is a real issue in our community. That's a real threat in our community. And so, I really like the idea. My experience with code development has been, if we can at least draw a line in the sand and start a new standard, then we can begin to protect the community. And there's a great example of that in KB Homes in California. We actually designed the subdivision layout and the construction of the materials to act as a place that will interrupt pathways into the community if the adjacent forest or wildland area is on fire. And so trying to introduce more concepts like that for future growth, trying to understand and figure out how to mitigate what those impacts are on the affordable housing problem, that's very much part of what we're at every day. The resource protection overlay pilot programs are already underway to try to make sense of that. We think that's a developer friendly and have a positive impact on affordable housing in the future. But we're sensitive to all those changes, but we think that we've got to try to find ways to introduce these concepts on the makeup and the construction materials that are used. And just for an example, we know this and we're working through this, but we've got MUI codes that would say, keep the vegetation away from the home or the business. We have landscape design requirements that says put it right up next against the building. We understand that. Neil and the team are working on deconflicting those types of conflicting city requirements. They're all working with community development. Community development's a big partner in that with us. But our recommendation is we will continue to seek ways to change those materials so they're fire resistant.
Yeah, I hear that, but from a historical perspective, we're already wrestling with probably, and I've discussed this with Michelle and Tiffany, literally 40 years of just really bad public policy. We've just made some horrible choices in 40 years. And here we are, dealing with trying to address some of these things that we shouldn't have done 40 years ago. And now here we are trying to solve some of those problems, you know. So if we try to update codes and it has this impact on housing affordability that so that very few people can actually afford to buy a house in there. What is it that we're trying to solve? You know, so I don't want future policy discussions to create a situation where 20, 30 years from now, we're having different discussions because now we've made some bad choices today that now affect what's happening 20 or 30 years from now. You know, we need to start really thinking of the big picture. And, you know, we didn't do that. I mean, some of us tried to say this a long time ago regarding the resource protection. I think that was just a horrible, horrible mistake. It has driven the price of housing up significantly in our community. It's one of the things that has created the affordability issue that we're trying to deal with today. And, you know, I would hate for us to go forward with some future policy discussions that my grandkids are going to be having this discussion 20, 30 years ago, wondering, why did we do that? You know?
I think the lesson that we have is from earlier in the presentation. How did the donut become a requirement? Well, it became a requirement when we started to see the community built and we put fires out instead of letting it go across the landscape. When we didn't know any better. And that's the information they had then when they put them in that public policy in place. And we have it. We have advocates of the resource protection plan that Neil and the team have already been in contact with. They're watching that thing like a hawk because they're under the information that that's a beneficial and productive resource protection plan is needed. Once Neil gets a hold of them and shows them the science, they start to understand that we need to change the environment. The dilemma we have is the risk is already here. Your point, we've got 40 years of growing the community. That risk is inside. That donut doesn't exist inside the community. It exists outside of the community. And our biggest risk now becomes what happens if we start seeing vegetation go on and start lighting off in the community. And it goes from vegetation to building. And then we get into a conflagration and we're now watching buildings burn buildings. That's our biggest threat today.
My favorite E. You're already getting ahead of me. It's the economic one. We totally have that slide at the end. We'll get into that in just a second. But that community reference to California, Escondido area, where you grew up, Chief Denham. They built a neighborhood with these things that we're looking at trying to institute here. They built that up front, not just the construction materials, but the entire design of the community. Every single home in that planned community was able to achieve insurance in their regular market and not the fair plan scenario that we hear about in California. And their average premium was below what houses of those value are paying in other places. So we're seeing examples where implementing a little bit of cost up front and prevention is having great benefits in that longer term insurability challenge, at least in California so far. Which is a great place to study what not to do most of the time. That's a good example there of something they're doing that's working. So here we've got this image we like to use about pathways. So like Chief said, pathways. Vegetation is structure pathways. So when that fire rolls off the forest into our neighborhood, tunnel fire was a great example. Went from the forest into the neighborhood, and then how it becomes homes burning homes. That structure to structure pathway. So when we talk about how we are enforcing that next E, enforcing science-based codes and ordinances, we are thinking about these pathways and how we design this to be enforcing the mitigation of that pathway, the disruption of that pathway. Perfect examples would be our fire restrictions coordination. So every year, once we get into fire season, every month we have or every week we have a meeting with Forest Service state and federal partners to review our fire restrictions, look at the indices, and to try to stay ahead of the curve and say, okay, we're getting into stage 1, stage 2, area closures, all of these details. Because that intent right there is to mitigate that vegetation and structure pathway. We don't have people in the woods or camping in areas using campfires or other devices that can start a fire, and we're mitigating that pathway. Another example is the permanent, well, Needs to be reviewed every couple of years, but the permanent camping and campfire ban across the Forest Service land, and then that permanent camping and campfire ban in the city of Flagstaff. Those are transformational for us in limiting that fire spread, both from the vegetation structure and inside the city, making that, some of these key areas where we do have a lot of natural environment inside the city, reducing the likelihood of a start that can become a vegetation structure fire in those spots. So enforcing those in partnership with the police department and our Forest Service law enforcement partners is a big part of what we do during the fire season. Next slide, please.
Yes, so what year was the J.E. Fuller study done on the damage effects? Fire done on the west side of Flagstaff?
Yes, the Upper Rio watershed, that was, I think, just a year or so ago, 2 years ago, maybe they put that on. Yep.
But it showed that we could have like $2.8 billion damage if a fire got out of control on the west side of town,
Yep.
right? If it got embedded into the community.
Was this the study that was done on the San Francisco piece?
It was as if a fire ran up through the Upper Rio watershed. So think of, let's just start with somebody in the Wing Mountain area and starts a fire and he crosses 180 and it runs up kind of between Snowball and the Dry Lake Hills and burns that down. And we see the kind of flooding that happened on the east side of town, but on that south side of the peaks, we're going to have floods going right down through here if that area burned catastrophically. And yeah, it wasn't an over $2 billion number. We did have studies back up in the FWBP days when it started, just showing the Dry Lake Hills area as well, another $1 billion potential cost in there. So these preventative measures are so important because those costs are real. We've seen them on the east side of town. We've seen them from the 2,000 acres of the museum fire cause significant damage. Now, granted, some of these areas are at risk. We built town at the base of a mountain to begin with. Even some of these areas have flooded without catastrophic fires. But once you add that high severity fire that changes that soil stability, we just see those costs start skyrocketing. Which is why if you've driven up Highway 180 lately, you see log trucks galore going up and down that road. That area has been a priority for a long time to make sure those thinning projects occur. There's been some delays. Some of those areas were under contracts for a long time that we couldn't get out of. Now, as soon as those areas changed in their contracting process, the Forest Service mobilized, the county's putting money in, the city's putting money in, and we're seeing great change. You get on Google Maps and you zoom in, you can see the corridor of 180 changing in its structure and pattern. So we're doing just about everything along that corridor to make sure below the wilderness area, designated wilderness, we can't run chainsaws or log. So we're limited in our tools up there, but as soon as you get below that wilderness boundary, that area is just a hotbed of activity right now. Which goes to the long-term need for these programs. It takes years. That NEPA, the planning process that's implementing the 180 corridor thinning was completed in 2010. So the plans to do that thinning.
What's a NEPA, Neil?
The NEPA is basically a complicated process of people having meetings and coming up with a plan. And it's the National Environmental Protection Act where, it requires the Forest Service to disclose the impacts of their plans. So they usually come up with a map, used to be like 10,000 acres. They come up with 3 or 4 alternatives of things they could do. The public gets involved, makes recommendations, then they make a decision. 2010, there was threats of lawsuits, objections, complications, because we didn't have the social license we have now. Fort Fry comes in, does a 2.5 million acre plan over 2 efforts, no litigation. So a very different place that we're in now compared to even just in 2010. But that's how long it takes to maintain some of these, the momentum to get some of these projects done. Okay, so pathways, then moving into education. This is such a big thing. Homeowner and community education, I think of this return on investment as basically unmeasurable. We have no way to track when we talk to somebody, how many more people they go to talk to and hopefully share the same messages. Another education piece we like to try to tell people, that home on the left could meet our wildfire prepared home standards. It doesn't mean you can't have grass. It doesn't mean you can't have plants. We just don't want you to do it within 5 feet of your house. So that is something we're trying to help people understand. We're not saying you need to live in some unbearable, Mad Max world of construction. We can still have a very comfortable, livable community and implement science-based wildfire risk reduction at the same time. Our home assessments, those are so important to us. If you guys haven't signed up for one, get on our website, sign up for a home assessment. When we get to stand in somebody's driveway and have that conversation, not about the world at large, but here's what we recommend for your home right here. It is such an important opportunity for us. I know a few of you have had folks come to your house, you've had one done. We have amazing people that work for us that do these assessments. And it's not just, again, that one time. This is an ongoing thing homeowners need to consider and work on. And we are there for a long-term relationship with these people. They will often call us and say, I've done, two of the things you recommended. What were the other ones again? I know I've got the report, and we get back in there and we'll come back to their house and follow up with them. Okay, next one.
All right, so we'll talk a little bit about emergency response. So one of the main things for us in charge of the fire department's emergency response to wildland fire is optimized, fully functioning. And that's key to limiting the impacts of incidents in the community. So all stations have wildland apparatus that are available for response 24/7, 365. And all fire department line personnel are qualified to respond to and to suppress wildland fires. So every station, every shift, every day, if there's wildland fire, somebody's going to be responding to that fire. So year-round planning for response. Let me back up. So along with all the fire department personnel, if we do have an incident, the staff that is within WFM holds some higher level of qualifications just from spending more time out on national incidents, different opportunities, different backgrounds where we've come from. But one of the things that allows for us is that we're on an IA in the city and the fire is maybe growing a little bit bigger than what would be considered type 5 fire or something like that, which think something maybe the size of this room. That would get elevated in an incident command position. But we have the qualifications like Neil was talking about, RXB2, clear all the way up to an ICT3, which would manage up to a 10,000 acre fire within our organization in WFM. And so we can provide training to all the line personnel, whether it be a BC, a captain, an engineer, to work on those qualifications as well and provide that training directly back to our firefighters, improving our response in the future. So it's slide 3, year-round planning for response. So this includes the development, coordination, and participation in training exercises with our emergency response partners. And our program, WFM, leads the design and development of a lot of these trainings. Basically design them from the ground up. We actively participate in them with our partners. And this helps us strengthen our coordination and evacuation readiness and overall response capability. Excuse me. Partner agencies that we work with, Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, so the state of Arizona, Coconino National Forest, the departments within the GFR. We work on our evacuation coordination with Coconino County Emergency Management. Obviously, the city of Flagstaff Emergency Management is involved. The city PD is involved, along with the Coconino National Forest. I don't know if I already said that. Sorry if I repeated myself. Then one of the other ones that we're working on right now, which is a pretty neat one, it's actually a FEMA-led evacuation exercise where they've reached out to us because they've heard about all the great work we're doing. And they want to come in and ask us if they would let us stress test, have them stress test our system. So we're working on getting that one set up. Be happy to report back on how that goes. So lastly, the WFM staff, our team of 9 supports the line personnel. One of the ways that we do this is we'll manage and coordinate the process of recheck. So when we have a fire, when we leave it, we don't just never come back or just spray water on it. Oh, there's no smoke. We will go back and check that fire multiple times until we don't find any heat. We'll take on a large role in doing that because it helps keep the frontline units in the city responding to calls, which is a really big benefit. We will help provide additional staffing for severity, so periods of high fire danger, whether it be just a very high or high extreme, whether it's a red flag day, critical fire weather watch. If we're already working that day, we'll staff longer through that critical weather window, or we'll staff additional days, coming in for days off, rotating days, whatever it takes in order to ensure that there's additional coverage within the city. Again, I did mention that, within WFM and the entire department, we send folks out to go work on these national incidents all over the country. And used to just be for the summer months. It's, shoulder seasons now, usually almost 10 months out of the year. We've got people that are sometimes traveling on the road. One of the biggest benefits that brings to us is the relationships we develop. Because we're out there working with people all over the country, and when we're having a bad day, those same people are coming in to help us. Having those relationships established allows the transition to happen much easier and smoother. So that covers that slide there. Move over to training. So one of the other things that we spend a lot of time doing is working on training. The photo that you're seeing right here is from a prescribed burn that we were doing recently with the Recruit Academy. So these are firefighters that are in the new recruit training. And there's 5 departments that are represented in this photo right here that we are taking a week out of their academy and have them out on an active prescribed burn, completing complex work while doing it in a training environment. So response training begins at the academy level and is required through the duration of the career. So again, all probationary firefighters go through an 11-week academy. 1 week to that is dedicated strictly to wild and fire. And then let's see. Yep, all FFD are required to complete 24 hours of annual wildfire training again throughout the year. And this is met through trainings that we develop internally for our firefighters. We put these on throughout the year. And this was just to help keep skills fresh, teaches them how to use new technologies that are becoming available. And sorry, where was I here? Okay, there we go. And these trainings are completed whether it's within their crews on duty, simulated drills like I've talked about that we put on. We'll bring them, have folks come out and help us on either prescribed burns, if we're doing some thing, work treatments, have them come out and work on their chainsaw skills, that type of thing. And then we also provide training to the entire GFR, so totaling 200 firefighters. And through that, we offer about 20 different opportunities throughout the year for additional courses and training, which is almost over 100 hours of instruction that the firefighters can take if they choose to. So really, we spend a lot of time providing training and developing training in order to improve the response and keep our firefighters and community safe. And next slide. So lastly, I'll just hit on, so that first video that we watched, the prescribed fire. So the Mars fire happened on July 9th, red flag day. So critical fire weather. This was in an area that had been engineered. And the response, even on a red flag day, included 1 FFD engine with 3 personnel, and the WFM module was 5, so 8 total people. Resistance to control was low, flame lengths less than a foot. Fire was easily contained that day. No real issues for us. Go to the next slide. So this is the bear fire the following day. This was over on Campbell Mesa, almost identical weather, in a non-engineered structured forest. The initial attack, this was on the Cotina National Forest. It was a Forest Service response, but it had 3 Forest Service engines with 15 people, a hot shot crew of 20, an initial attack dozer with 2, 4 patrol units, and then additionally 2 helicopters were ordered. What we like to talk about this is if you're looking at that previous picture, the guys are walking around there. That's a direct attack strategy, 1 foot in the black, safety zone. It's a much safer way to fight fire. We're not getting too close to that one. Fire activity is going to be extreme. The heat, everything else, it's just back off. It's going to take longer to get containment, and it's not as safe of an environment for our folks to be working in. So it's just a really good example that shows the difference between treated and untreated environment, and especially with the fires literally being a day apart and almost identical weather conditions. So that's it for response.
Thank you, Dylan.
Jump back up.
So the last E we'll get into is our economic incentives. So supporting economic incentives that encourage parcel level action in wildfire risk reduction investments at scale. So we'll start at the parcel there. And on the left is a slide from Headwaters Economics. It's just an amazing group of folks over there. We have an MOU with Headwaters Economics. It's kind of unique. They've been sitting at the table with us as we go through some of these code updates because we keep asking them, you know, what is the impact if we go this way? What's the impact if we go that way? And they're able to plug in and help us with analysis. So in California, that's where this number comes from on the left there, that building to that wildfire prepared home base is about a 2% increase in cost over their current WUI code, or what they call Chapter 7A. So if you're in a WUI environment, that's their baseline. Our WUI code is very similar to Chapter 7A in California. So if the proposals that we're putting together, we're still working on customizing those numbers for Flagstaff, but building to what we see is potentially like the most science-based standard, and that moving from ignition resistant to non-combustible, we're gonna potentially see a 3% increase, and that's not in the total cost, that's just in the cost of construction. We're working to try to better understand some of the potential cost savings over the life of a mortgage, or I think in Flagstaff, we want to make it more like a 10-year period, that everybody owns a home for 30 years. So we want to better understand if we do propose something that results in a 3% increase in cost of construction, what can we potentially see as those costs over a 10-year period if your insurance rates are either maintained. You know, we don't want to say that we're potentially envisioning a reduction or cost savings, but at least if we can mitigate those increases over time, what do those numbers look like in comparison? So, you know, I wasn't a homeowner or paying attention to any of this in 2008 when Flagstaff initiated its last movie code update. But I would imagine there was a lot of similar messages that, you know, this is going to increase costs in a way that are catastrophic to our community. But we have seen areas where that building code change has just been so beneficial to our community. If we didn't have that code, I can't even imagine what some of our insurance challenges would be now. So then also in the natural environment, we're seeing great investment changes over time. Like I said earlier, Flagstaff Watershed Protection Project, I keep a brutal spreadsheet that tracks the city investments and then what our partners have contributed. And we've got our $10 million bond, and I've got a list of almost $50 million in partner contributions. So $1 of ours for every $5 of theirs. And that chart, that's unreadable, sorry, on the right there. Fry, we're seeing for every dollar the feds have put into Fry, $2.50 or $2.07 there in partner investments at scale as well. So these economic investments can be huge. You know, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars across Fry. Or it could be something as simple as some of the Zone Zero grants that we're piloting right now, where we can give a homeowner $600 to try to create a Zone Zero around their house. We've been successful with hazardous fuel reduction cost share grants for years, where we can go to a homeowner and say, we can provide 80% or 90%, depending on the grant cost, to reduce some trees on your property. They pay the other percent. And then even something as simple as our air filter distribution program we've been doing for a couple of years now, where we give homeowners that qualify an air purifier. So if there's a smoke impact in the air, we'll come to their house, we'll give them an air purifier. A lot of these people will follow up with them a year later, we'll get their email address, we'll check in, and they say, oh, that thing's amazing, I bought 3 more of them for my house. So some of these incentives really are impactful in economics beyond just, you know, whether they're big numbers or even small numbers. So we are, our program has been pretty darn successful at securing, you know, grants from private organizations, state and federal partners as well. SBK knows all about it. Our successes with our grants. Yes, Chief?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention to the group, these 2 to 3% increases, those are clearly for new construction. You know, applying these, you know, standards in the built environment that's already here, very expensive, very costly. We're working with state legislators right now, trying to get funding to secure grants where people can go in and make meaningful changes. It's just not going to be really attainable for a typical homeowner in Flagstaff without some type of assistance. So we're not just looking to within the community, we're looking at the state level to try to grab funding to push it towards some of these initiatives as well.
Thank you. All right, I think that's the end of the 5 E's.
Right, well, then, thank you.
Okay, well, Mark Wilson, Deputy Chief. So when I stand up, you probably know that we're getting ready to talk money. So,
We've made that.
yeah, the reality is, what I appreciate is the passion and the initiative that's been done in our community for a long time. We're ahead of the curve. We see a lot of benefits associated with the program. Nobody's doubting what that is. So the question becomes, what's changed? So let's just, you can go to the next slide, and you'll probably just go to the next one. So what has changed? So in 2019, we did a study, and in 2020, we adopted the Wildfire Resource Infrastructure Protection Fee. That was because prior to that, this entire presentation that was given to you prior to 2019 was funded off of grant funding predominantly, a little bit of general fund, and that grant funding in FWPP, which you all were a part of if you lived here in 2012 was not to sustain something long-term. It was to get us off the ground and start seeing all the good work that we did. We saw all that happening, but there was nothing that kept us moving forward because, as you've heard all along, this is a never-ending game that we're in. Whether we go and thin property, give it 7, 10 years, what do you have? Regen? You got to come back and thin it again. So we're in the business of protecting this forever, as Chief likes to say. So this fee was developed based off of the funding and the needs and the program that was identified at the time. So what has changed? Well, obviously, it's paid by a water service usage fee to all Flagstaff residents, right? That's what funds it. That goes up and down based off of water usage, based off of who's in, what type of facility, the amount of gallonage, everything can impact that. One large commercial property moves out, that changes that fee support base. And so you see a up and down cycle with what that fee presents every year. It's hard to be able to project clearly. The next thing is, as you can imagine, after the Palisades fire, we saw a 5 times the number of increase in requests to go out and do home assessments. Great, that's wonderful. We want to continue to support that, but because when you remember slide 12 that showed the forests that have been treated and now the risk was very evident, where's the risk predominantly right now? In the neighborhood areas, right? That is what is true with the Palisade fire. We have a greater risk than they did. There's risk for the structure. We have also fuel and structures associated with that. So need for ongoing funding for community risk specialists. One of the positions we currently have is grant funded. We talked about that in our previous presentation. That is grant funded for another year or two. What we're looking for is to maintain that position. We're not asking for additional positions. We're asking for funding to maintain that because that is not a sustainable fund at this point in time. Additional funding for the Wildfire Resilient Home Initiative. You've heard a ton of all the good work that's going on, the home assessments, the money that we're able to put into to try to do some at the property level and the home level. Those are huge lifts and those are important for us to be able to maintain. This is changing though from what the original intent was being projected as in 2019 in a good way. We're seeing the need to enhance and improve the way that we're moving into these neighborhoods. And again, we talked about it was done in 2019. It didn't account for personnel and inflationary realities. If you look at what the projected costs of personnel costs and inflation costs, it was probably based off of a CIP or something around that 3% mark. And you all know that are in the business world in the first couple of years after 2019 and 20, what did we see? 8, 9%, 7% became common. So we quickly ran away from some of the projections. Frequency and severity of the unplanned catastrophic wildfires, that has been well discussed around here. And so the need to continue, it's increased our timeline for our typical fire season. So what we used to all grow up and think around here, growing up in Flagstaff was, all right, we were good till about June. Father's Day was that prickly time. And then it ended about right around the end of August, early September, maybe because the monsoons had already hit. And then we were good, no longer the case. And then the final thing is we have a huge slide and a huge presence with the Wildfire Management Division in training all of those all-risk responders. To the point where the state, as you all know, we're going to talk about it in a little bit here, gave us $4 million to build a facility to house not only the WFM personnel, but also to enhance and improve our training capacities within the region. Huge influence of this team. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk money. Current operations right now, what we're anticipating, working with our finance team, and Rick and his team, we'll talk about this a little bit later when you get into the finance, the current deficit that we're projecting in about 3 to 4 years, and it goes up inflationary every single year, is about $290,000. In this division, within this section, under the WRIP, we project that we'll be in the red in about 3 to 4 years if we don't do something. So you have options. You all will talk with finance on what those options are, but this is an identified deficit that is above and beyond what the WRIP can currently fund. We also have contractual commodities, which include things like home hardening funding. If we want to get out and really make influence in these communities that are producing one of the threats that we all recognize, we need to be able to get out there and provide some of that training, education, and support to be able to mitigate some of those problems. hazardous fuel reduction projects. When we built the original plan, what we didn't have was money set aside because we had FWPP. We didn't have money set aside to also bring in additional contract work to take care of some of this reduction within the city boundaries. So this will help us. And remember, a great job on our team. We have never, I would honestly probably say never did a $1-for-$1 match. We've always been on the winning edge of maybe about 5 to 6 to 7, sometimes greater dollars that we pick up for every $1 we spend. So there's a lot of work that can be done and needs to be done in projects within our community. You heard about the partnerships within the Forest Service. That's public land. That's their responsibility. In the city of Flagstaff, it's all of our responsibility. And so that's why this is so important to be able to support these fuel reduction projects within our own city of Flagstaff footprint. The new wildfire management facility is about $125,000 of ongoing maintenance, utilities, fees, contractuals, commodities, everything to run that station that we currently don't have in that budget. Any questions before I go to the next slide on that? Okay, next slide. So to break down that new position, we talked about it. It's currently in place through grant funding. We're asking for $127,000 in FY 29 and 30. When we worked with Rick's team on when that gets funded, we feel that that's about when that grant's going to come to an end. That's when we need to be able to establish that. So you'll work on that calendar. So it's not just if this were to move and this were to get approved, we would start paying that year one. We're looking at 29, 30 before we feel like we don't want to hit that until the need actually is approved. The WFM training facility. This is a big one because we got $4 million from the state. What they asked for us to do was to build a WFM station and to have the training capacity for the region. Looking at some of the preliminary numbers, even with our design costs that the city put in at $680,000, we're projecting we're about $2 million short. So that shortfall is in the request that's going to be presented to all of you. With that, we've got $165,000 to equip that. That's radios. That's all the things that need to go into that fire station to be able to make it functional for the WFM crew. Everything from office equipment, we'll use what we have, obviously, it's a projection. The final capital is radio replacement. So radios are expensive. The radios that we carry, some of our radios that we carry in all risk, we just got a recent bid. Chief Conley knows us very well. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases where fires radios are even more. We're at about $8,500 per portable radio. Per portable. So we got mobiles and portable radios. So that's a capital replacement that we don't have that built into the WRIP. We're requesting that as a one-time. So all of these, if we go to the next slide. Yeah, please.
Question online.
Oh, yeah.
Scott,
Hey, Mark, this is Scott. Question for you is, how did the $4 million number come about for the original construction cost for the WFM facility?
Yeah, great question, Scott. So it was twofold. One was it was originally designed just to be the WFM station. We also put in a second request for $4 million for training. That got lumped together and they were able to support $4 million. So that's where that 4 million came. And that's why we have a shortfall from what we originally asked for. Does that answer your question, Scott?
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. So final slide for me, total gap. I apologize that the font's a little small there. Ongoing current operations, we've got about $565,000. That's all of that stuff that we talked about, contractual commodities included in running the fire station. Capital is the radio at $250,000 to replace all those radios. The new position is the one that's currently grant funded. The WFM training facility is 2.165. That includes the $2 million that we have as a gap plus the 165 to put all the necessary equipment and everything inside of it. Gives us a grand total of ongoing of about $692,000 and a capital gap one time of $2.4 million to complete the radios and the current WFM training station. Yes, sir.
With this new facility for training,
Yeah.
Will we be able to offset any of the costs by charging other municipalities for training their personnel?
Very, very limited. And I'll tell you why, because in our profession, There's a lot of training that goes on across all of the different regions and different departments, and it's trying to bolster and enhance. One of the big things about the state funding some of this is so that we will provide that training to the region, and it's not an at profit proposition. It's a, we need this training, so we need to be able to provide it. So that's why they were willing to give us $4 million. That's not to say we'll never charge for any class. That's not the intent of this, is to be a for-profit opportunity. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions on the funding gap? Because this is going to wrap up and conclude this portion of it before we go into insurance, which is totally separate from what we're talking about with WFM. Okay, thank you.
It's not a contractor 5 minutes.
At least you left room for 15 minutes. Can you give us 15 minutes?
Okay, so as we talk about insurance, I'm gonna make this really quick. We've got a couple slides in here. I'm just gonna completely skip over. Equestrian Estates, University Heights. This area has been thinned, so this isn't the most recent imagery, but you can see here's a little donut right around Equestrian Estates. This is now basically continues all the way down through here. Working with a whole new way of doing development and tree retention and combining all of these different programs we're working on. One of the best ways we can invest in reducing wildfire risk to University Heights is to make sure what gets built over here becomes a pathway disruptor instead of a pathway enabler. So this old vision that as Flagstaff expands out, we're increasing our risk. I don't believe that's true. I think if we build smart, we are decreasing our risk, because if a fire starts over here on a red flag day and our winds are blowing this way, this new community is going to disrupt that fire from getting in to University Heights. So then everybody over here clearly has done all of their zone zero work, and they don't have their firewood stacked against their house, and they've raked all their pine needles. So those embers landing in the neighborhood over here, we're not worried about. So really thinking about where the wildfire risk is, it's not necessarily in the forest. It's in the neighborhoods. Building smart, doing all this work cohesively together is going to be our game changer. Next slide, please. So real quickly, our insurance challenges, we need to align around these science-based mitigations that matter. We need 3 things to happen across the state. We basically need an agreed upon mitigation program. When we come to your driveway, we tell you to do these things. There's no framework that the state recognizes that that's what they want us to be telling you. Your insurance company may not care if you do those things. And it's really not in alignment. We've had people do all of the risk reduction work and still have a non-renewal. It's a mess. The insurance companies can have them as a customer. They've done the work. Their models are not picking it up. So we need to agree that these are the mitigations that matter for homeowners. We need a framework that is there. Then we need to be able to monitor it. So how often does the homeowner have to report that they've maintained that? Is it annually? Is it more frequent? Is it when they renew their policy? We have to agree to that. And then we need some sort of agreed upon incentive for the homeowner. So why should they invest in this? So the insurance companies need to basically get on board and say, yes, we agree that when somebody does these mitigations, it will enact some sort of recognition. So linking all of these things together and pricing of that risk appropriately is where our goal is right now, where that price of risk is not being mitigated properly. The models the insurance companies are using do not know if you've done those risk reduction actions. So they're missing out on customers, or their model may be telling them that they should be giving insurance to somebody that in no way should they be insuring that property. So we don't have connections right now between your parcel and that satellite image of monitoring or modeling that insurance company is using. It's going to be challenging because we literally need to go parcel by parcel, but we get all these data collections completed. We work with the homeowners. We have a framework. That information will start feeding up into a statewide program that actually gets all of these different conflicted policies, get them in alignment. I think we have a path that we can make this work. All right, I'm going to skip the rest of the slides.
Real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
So one of the things that I've heard, when I'm talking to people about fire mitigation and getting your home assessments and things, or people are like, I don't want to do that because if they come and tell me I should do this, this, and this, and this, and I don't have the funds or the means to do this, this, and this, then it automatically falls back on me. Well, I was told to do it, but I didn't. how does they? But you're saying they don't communicate right now, so that wouldn't be,
Even,
The
even when the system is in place, as we're working to put it in place in the state of Arizona, it's not gonna be that your local fire department is ratting you out to the insurance industry.
yeah, it's funny because that's
That's
how
not the
people are like,
design.
well, we were told to do it, but we didn't have the
Yeah,
means to do it, so
I
we didn't.
haven't
Now all
heard
of a
that.
sudden I'm
That's
at risk.
interesting. That's not what we're building.
Okay,
No, not at all.
perfect.
And the challenge too
I didn't think
is,
so, but when you get that, you want to be able to answer it the right way. When people are like, oh yeah, no, don't do that. That's gonna put
one of the
you.
realities of recognizing when risk reduction has occurred is we are recognizing when risk reduction hasn't occurred. And so we don't want to separate those things and say, well, we're gonna recognize all the good work, but if it's bad work, don't look over there. You can't really do both. So I think we're setting up a program that will enable most people to be successful with this. All right, I'm just gonna skip everything and hand it over to Kyle to talk about the ISO work. So let's
Thank you for the time.
skip ahead.
Can we keep going?
Keep going.
There you go. All right. Thank you very much. You can go back one, sorry. Thank you. Kyle Denham, Deputy Chief over at Community Risk. I get the opportunity to supervise wildfire and fire prevention. So what I wanted to talk about is ISO, which is Insurance Services Office Fire Rating. I don't want to confuse that with the wildfire insurance. This is just a different tool that insurance companies use. So ISO is a part of Verisk, and it's a private analytic company. They service about 39,000 communities in the country. And what they do is they come into your community, they evaluate your community in general, your fire department, and it's based on a few factors, but it's not a annual thing, it's a periodic thing. They try and do it every 5 years. We had ours done in 2021, and we actually are due this year, so they're back on track for that 5 years. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So when ISO evaluates a community, they do it on a 1 to 10 scale. So it's kind of like a grade. 1's best, 10 is the lowest score. So when we did ours in 2021, we actually got a 2-10. So that's a really good score. It's really good. And what the 2 is anywhere in city limits, we are at that 2 out of 10. Then outside of city limits, we're at that 10 in the area because of the factors like water supply and how, if they have hydrants or the length of time it takes for water tenders to get there and fire response and things like that. But overall in the city, we did very well. ISO, so some of the things they look at is your staffing, the apparatus you have, your dispatch capabilities, the training, water supplies I mentioned. And then some other factors are your policies, procedures, and community-wide is height of building. So I know Chief Finnell mentioned it. We have one coming up this year. We have another evaluation, but we went from 300 roughly in 2001 to 600, and do you remember 600 and something in 2025? So that's going to be a factor come this year when they come to evaluate us. And basically ISO is just one indicator of how prepared your community is and how resilient. Next slide, please. So I mentioned overall two is really good, but they did identify some gaps that are going to sound familiar to you. It's going to be more review, but some of the factors on the 2021 report was having 2 fully staffed quints. And so one thing I want to mention with that is we do have the cross-staffed, co-staffed that we mentioned in the presentation before, but it's having the staffing on those trucks that gets you those scores. So when the crews don't have to decide what truck to jump on when 911's called, and when they get those tones, it's having those people on there. And then deployment, that was identified, and Chief Finnell shared that heat map in the other presentation that kind of showed if we have an incident in the middle of the city and how fast all the units are supposed to get there that are required to be there. There's really only that one spot, if you remember. But then positioning that other station on JW Powell, it really makes the whole community much better protected. So then staffing, I mentioned, can't just have the quints, you gotta staff the quints and then other personnel. And then the water system testing, as I mentioned, we got great hydrants in this town, great water supply, but it's when you get on the outskirts that we don't have it so well. So the last slide, I just wanted to mention, basically what a better ISO rating means for residents and businesses. And we had a meeting with ISO the other day. So insurance companies use different algorithms for how they use this tool. So they get this information, but they all do it a little bit differently. So it does have the potential for insurance savings for homeowners and businesses, especially, you know, businesses that don't have protection systems in them, like a lot of our downtown does. It gives you that ability for a faster, stronger emergency response. And then overall, it just gives you better customer service in the city, which is what we strive for. And you're better protected as a community. So one of the bullets there too is the improved economic development, because when you have a safer community, possibly lower premiums, it gives, you know, more incentive for businesses to come here, to build here, to grow in our community. And then overall, it just makes the whole system more resilient and a safer place to live. So that was it. That was 5. You're not even 5. You're good.
And I even threw a question.
Thank you.
Questions, people? I was just gonna say, I really appreciate the team coming and providing all this information. As you can see, our ability to respond in fire protection and the whole 5 E's, it has so many injects into quality of life, whether it's community safety, whether it's the safety of the firefighters, whether it's affordable housing. So it's really a complex issue. We understand that. We're really grateful for this group of people to kind of help us kind of sort through all that. We certainly hope we can find a way to close some of these gaps, whether it's any one of our service areas. You know, we have some noticeable gaps. It's a tough issue. We get it. And as you can see, so many things are interrelated. And so we're really grateful for the opportunity. Hopefully that answered a lot of questions. And as always, offline, if you have questions for us, please reach out.
Anything else for the good of the order this afternoon? All right, thank you one and all. Appreciate it. Shannon.
No meeting next week. We'll see you back on the 18th and we'll be back over at Core Services.
Committee spring break.
Yeah.
Thank you one and all.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the week.